بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وأصحابه ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين وبعد. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. And welcome to another episode with Mukhtasar Minhaj al-Qasidin. In this section, we're looking at another chapter, if you will. Essentially, the signs of a sick heart, how to bring it back to health, and the avenue to knowing the faults within oneself. All right, so to get started here, the Imam, he says, it's important to understand that every limb of the body or organ therein has been created for a specific purpose. And a sign that it is sick is its inability to perform that purpose. You start to see some type of disorder in it. So for example, the hand. If your hand becomes ill or disordered, it can no longer grasp things. The eye, if it is suffering from some ailment, it has a hard time seeing. And the heart, of course. It's unable to do what it was designed to do when it's ill. Like knowledge, wisdom, awareness, love of Allah and His worship. And of course, that has impacted, the heart is impacted by all types of desires. So if a person knows anything and doesn't know, I should say, if a person knows everything, possesses wide knowledge, but doesn't have awareness of Allah, it's as if they know nothing. So as a sign of true awareness of Allah is love. Whoever truly knows Allah, then they will love Allah. And a sign that you have this love is that you prefer that over all of other beloved things. Meaning you prefer the love of Allah over all other loved and coveted things. So if there is something out there that you love over that love for the divine, then this is a sign that your heart is sick. It's like the stomach that prefers to eat clay or dirt over bread and has no appetite for bread whatsoever. It's a sign that there's something wrong. The sicknesses of the heart, they're hidden, unseen. And the possessor of that heart may not realize that it's sick. They become heedless to those sicknesses. And if they do realize it, it's difficult for them to be patient with the bitterness of the medicine, because the medication that's required goes in direct opposition with their desires. And if they do have the patience, it's likely that they will not find a skillful doctor that can help remedy and cure their heart, because the doctors, the care providers in this case, they are the scholars. And sickness has already overcome them. Seems like Imam al-Ghazali is pointing out a reality during his time, that even the scholars of that time were widely affected by diseases of the heart. So the doctor that's ill, it's very difficult for them to take care of themselves, let alone someone else. And for that reason, it's as if the sickness has become incurable. The knowledge of its cure has become lost. the heart will essentially reject the treatment in totality. And so you'll find that people have become busy with or have embarked upon outward actions that appear to be worship. It appears as if it's ibadah, but inside it's nothing more than ada. It's just habit. It looks like they're performing worship, but their intention is nothing more than habitual activity. And this is the sign of sickness at its root. As for curing it and returning it and restoring its health, after treatment is sought, then you have to look at the weaknesses. You have to look at each weakness on its own. So, for example, if you were to treat the sickness of stinginess, its treatment would be to spend money, but not to be extravagant and excessive in the spending, because in that case, you would go to another extreme of tabdir, which is essentially another disease in itself. So it's like when you treat coldness with heat, which is too intense, then the heat will become overpowering, and that in and of itself will be a sickness. So what we're after here is moderation. So from my personal experience and what I've observed over the years is that this is often seen in associating, or we talked about prejudice and partisan bias previously as one of the diseases of the heart. When someone is associated with kind of an extreme group, and then at some point they become disenfranchised with that group, in order to make up for their association with that extremeness and to, disavow themselves of what was happening, they will simply migrate to another extreme group, perhaps the exact opposite, going from one opposite to the other. They'll skip past the moderation and middle part, and they'll go from this to that. So essentially what that's saying is, it was never really about that group in and of itself. You migrated to that group for a reason. You were attracted to that group for a reason. And that's because in your heart, there's a disease. There's a sickness that's festering. And so the obvious sign of that is when you realized that this particular group or this extreme sect was not fulfilling you in some way, or you realized there was some falsehood or misguidance associated with them, you, instead of going back into the middle, moderate path, you migrated to another extreme group. It's like this living on the edge. So essentially what the Imam's getting at is that the course of treatment is there in order to get you back to the moderate middle path. He says if you want to come to know what that is, the moderate middle path, then first you have to look at yourself. And so if withholding money and saving it and collecting wealth is more delightful to you, it's easier for you to do than to spend your wealth and give it to those that are deserving of it, then you should know that what is overwhelming is the quality of stinginess. And so to cure yourself of that, you have to spend money. But then if you find that spending money, giving it to those that are deserving of it is more delightful to you, it's easier for you to do that than to save and to hold, then perhaps what is overwhelming you is that you're being extravagant in spending. And so what you need to do in that case is you need to practice some control, some financial control. You can find this as well, much like the example that I gave about being involved and associated with groups. Same thing goes here for financial practices. There are people that they're great at saving. They're good, but when it comes time to spending, it's like painful. Even when it's required or when it's praised, like on Eid. It's recommended that you spend on your family for Eid. It's recommended. You show them a good time, you let them enjoy the day, you give them gifts, and etc. It's recommended, a recommended practice to spend on the family on Eid. But somebody that's suffering from this sickness of stinginess will struggle with even doing that. Something that happens twice a year. It'll be a burden. It might even ruin the day. Arguments may ensue, one saying we need to get new clothes, we should buy some gifts, we should get some food, we should go have fun, and the one's going, nope, that's a waste of money, let's not do that. I've worked so hard to save all this money and now you just want to go blow it, when in reality is, the middle course is to spend a little and enjoy the moment. Then you might have one that is on the other end of the spectrum, that those occasions are not just twice a year or 5 times a year or 10 times a year. They're actually more like 52 times a year, every week or more. They're ready to unload and let it rip. And then they find themselves in a predicament where they cannot take care of themselves or their dependents in a responsible manner financially. They're just buying stuff and spending and giving and gifting, and sometimes they put themselves into a very, very difficult situation, going into debt, borrowing money, and perhaps even looking for it in impermissible ways. And so here we're showing 2 types of extremes where the cure for either of those is to bring them back into the middle. One has to practice some moderation, one has to practice some generosity, and with that, hopefully they will find themselves cured. It says, and in doing so, you continuously watch yourself. Take note of your habits. Think about the things which are easiest for you and the things which are difficult for you. And that's where you will find the proper and appropriate treatment. And what you're trying to do is you're trying to sever all the ties that you have in your heart towards wealth, so that you're not leaning to one side or the other. You're not leaning towards overspending and you're not leaning towards being overly stingy, but it becomes, he says, like water. That wealth becomes like water. You don't withhold it unless there's a need to do so, and you don't spend it unless there's a need to do so. And all of the heart should become like that. And when it's like that, you will approach Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala saliman. You have a heart which is at rest and at peace. You won't be attached to the world. It says it should be this way with all other qualities of your character, your disposition, so that there is no attachment with anything to this world, so that when your soul leaves this world, it has severed ties with everything in it, and done so there's no consideration for them. You're not worried about them. And then you can return to your Lord at rest and at ease. It says the true middle path is between these 2 extremes, but it's rather obscure. The middle path is finer than a hair. It's sharper than a sword. It's difficult for people to stay on it. And for that reason, the servant has been ordered to recite every day, multiple times, اهدنا الصراط المستقيم. اهدنا الصراط المستقيم. Surah Al-Fatiha, this verse we're familiar with, guide us to the straight path. Al-Mustaqim is the middle path. And that's why we've been asked, I should say commanded, to make this prayer in Salah over and over, repetitive every single day, because the middle course is so elusive for us that we're asking Allah to guide us to that path on such a regular basis. He says, then if you're unable to, if you're unable to be on the middle course, then you should push yourself to be close to it. If you're unable to find that middle course and stay on it constantly, then you should at least be as close as possible to it and know that your salvation is bil amal as-salih. It's righteous deeds. And righteous deeds are not produced unless you have a good character, you have a good disposition. So you need to inspect yourself, all of your qualities and your character. You need to work hard to cure and treat each of them one after the other. You should have patience, those that have determination to do so, regarding the pain of this treatment. And remember that you'll be pleased when it's over, just like a child is happy after they've been weaned from their mother. If you think about a baby when they are weaned, or I should say a toddler at that point after they've gone, the weaning process is very difficult. It struggles. But when they're done and you try to get them to go back to their mother, what do they typically do? They don't want it. They're now enjoying solids and snacks and different foods and things. They're accustomed to that now. And they wouldn't go back to being nursed by their mother. And then, if you can recognize the fact that your life is very short in comparison to the life of the hereafter, then you'd be willing to endure the hardship, like traveling a few days in order to have eternal bliss. There's a parable that's used in the Arabic language. In the sabahi yahmadul qawm as-surah. It's at morning that those who traveled by night are praised. Right? They endured the hardship of traveling. They stayed the course through the night. They arrived, and in the morning time, they're there. So, the next section here is very important, and this is kind of a bitter pill to swallow. It's talking about acknowledging your own flaws and faults. He says, know that when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants good for his servant, then he will give him insight into his own faults and flaws. So whoever has such insight, then they shouldn't be worried, or that servant shouldn't be worried. If they know their flaws and their faults, then they can work on them. But most people, they're ignorant of their own flaws. They're more able to see the speck in the eye of their brother than the ember which is burning in their own. And so there's 4 ways that he mentions that a person can become acquainted with their own flaws and their own faults. And the first one is that they sit with a shaykh who has great insight into human flaw. And he will help you understand what your faults are and give you the remedy or prescribe for you a treatment for their cure. And of course, he says this is something that's become difficult to find in our times. But if you are able to find someone of this caliber, then you've come across a skilled doctor, and you should never leave their side. This is the first way. The second way is that you ask a truthful friend, an honest friend who has insight, who's also mutadayyin, very religious. They're righteous. And you ask them to point out the ugly parts of your character and your deeds. This was the way of the pious, by the way, the companions included. They used to love that people would point out their shortcomings. The great Amir al-Mu'mineen Umar ibn al-Khattab, he said, "May Allah have mercy on the one who guides us to our faults, shows us our flaws and our shortcomings." He said to one of the companions, he asked Hudayfa, "Hal ana min al-munafiqeen?" Do you think that I'm from the hypocrites? He says, I'm asking because anyone that is increased in their status, or I should say it was asked like this, because anyone that is increased in their yaqada, which is their awareness, or their being awake, if you will, to the realities of this world, then they become more, they hold themselves in contempt. The more they are aware, the more they hold themselves in contempt. And again, this is something that's become few and far between in our time. More often you'll find a friend who is going to commend you, wrongfully so. It's going to boost your ego with misplaced comments and praise. They want to flatter you more than they want to help you out. They're not going to tell you of your own faults and flaws. The pious, they used to love this, that people would point these things out. Now, he says, those are the worst to us. Someone that would point out a flaw of ours, we would see them as the worst people. And this is a sign of weak iman. He says that the evil disposition is like, or the evil character is like a scorpion. If someone were to point that out to you, that there was a scorpion crawling under your clothes, like crawling up your clothes, you would quickly turn them up and be worried about killing the scorpion. Meaning you wouldn't be worried about the one that pointed it out to you. You say, why are you bothering me? Why are you busying yourself with my clothes and these things? You would just quickly jump into action to try and kill the scorpion. And he says, repugnant character is far worse than the scorpion, which should be no surprise. The third pathway, the third avenue to coming to know your faults and your flaws is benefit from what your enemies say about you. The opposition. What do they say about you? Because they will have no problem exploiting your faults and flaws and making mention of them. So instead of ignoring that, you look into it to see if there's any truth to it and benefit from that. It's more likely that you'll benefit from such a person than you would benefit from a friend who is going to flatter you and conceal those flaws and faults. And the last one, number 4, is that you mix with people some, and everything that you see which is repugnant or ugly among those people, then you stay away from that quality. And that's where we'll wrap up for this session today. Jazakallah khair. In the coming sections here, it's going to talk about some things and some specifics, inshallah. And hopefully we'll have time for that. tomorrow in the coming days before the month ends. Sallallahu alaihi wasallam ala nabiyyina Muhammad. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.